Hi, this is Dan Heisman, and we're continuing with our series of YouTube videos to help you improve your chess game. We haven't done an amateur game for a while. This was a game that was submitted to me a while ago. In fact, it's almost the 1 year anniversary. Let's check my watch. It is. The date on the email for this game was submitted exactly 1 year ago today. So I guess it's appropriate we go through the game. This was played by one of my former students against the computer Betho, which is the one that I play out loud. And he said my playing out loud encouraged him to play out loud as well. So he thought that this game was interesting. He was white. So let's see. Now his ICC rating is 1780, which I have marked on the white. ICC ratings are about 150 points higher than USCF ratings, which are roughly equivalent to FIDE ratings. So figure he's about 1630 USCF. Okay, so he's playing against Betho, a mid-level computer, slightly lower rated than he is. Betho plays Sicilian. Now Betho has two ways that it plays. It has a nice book in it, but if you take it out of its book, it plays really weird moves. So actually, if you know that and you're trying to trick it here, you could play a reasonable developing move that's not a very booky move here, like maybe a B3 kind of move or an A3 kind of move, or even a C4 kind of move, which are not terrible moves. They're just a little bit, rare moves. And if it gets Betho out of her book, she'll play really terrible. Or you could try to outbook her. So in this case, my student's not trying to play anything strange. She's just trying to play main book lines. Knight F3. Knight C6, D4, that's the open Sicilian, where you play Knight F3 and D4 against the Sicilian. C takes D, trading a side pawn for a center pawn. Knight takes D4, Knight F6, the main move, hitting the pawn, Knight C3. Okay, so in this position, Black has several moves. He can play D6, which is what's I guess John Nunn has called the classical Sicilian, which could lead to Richter Rusers or Sozens or whatever. He can play the Sicilian for knights, which I've played quite a bit with E6. The most popular move here is to play the Sveshnikov, E5, and then after knight B5, you play D6. Lately, with Caruana and Carlson, they've been playing lines with like knight D5. That used to not be the main line. The main line was bishop G5, A6, knight A3, B5, and now white has a choice between knight D5 and bishop takes F6. Those are the two main lines there. But in any case, in this game, Betho did not play the Sveshnikov. Betho simply went for the classical Sicilian. All right, so now the three big ways of playing against it. The Richter Ruser is still popular. The Sozin, not so popular. And then you could sort of play it like an English attack. You can't play bishop E3 because knight G4, which is not terrible for white. He can play bishop G5. But I think most people who play this line with the bishop E3 play F3 first to stop that, and then they play bishop E3 with sort of an English attack. Instead, white plays the old move bishop E2, which leads to what's called the Boleslavsky. And the Boleslavsky is not all that wonderful for white. You just don't see this anymore. The computer agrees that, black's doing well after the main move E5, which is what Betho plays. So if we give this position to Stockfish 12, which doesn't have any book in it, at least my version doesn't, it says that after the main line knight B3, that white is ahead by about, right now he says about 0.1. So 0.1, that's about a normal opening advantage, maybe slightly less. I'll leave Stockfish on the bottom here. He's also saying knight takes C6 is a possible move. So knight B3. And black plays bishop E7. Right now, Stockfish is saying 0, 0, 0. One idea for white here is to play... Black can play an early A5. White can play an early A4. Black's idea on A5 is to try to drive the knight off the B3 square. White castles. Black plays queen C7. Now, that's a little bit unusual. Black should just castle. Castling is always a good idea. Castle early and often is the humorous principle. A lot of my students do this kind of stuff. They think, oh, I can always castle later. I'll bring out some more pieces. And then they do what happened to Betho in this game, which is they never get a chance to castle. So in this kind of position, I have a principle that says if you can castle and it's obviously perfectly safe and you can do other moves, there's probably a very high chance that you can't go wrong by castling. So here, castles gives white a normal opening advantage, and queen c7, according to Stockfish, white can now play bishop g5. And the idea of bishop g5 is to remove the guard of the knight on d5. So what white's threatening to do is play bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, knight d5, and establish that outpost for the knight. And let's say black tries to stop that with bishop e6. You can still play bishop takes, and if bishop takes, you can play knight to b5, and now black's losing this pawn and he won't be able to castle because after he moves the queen, knight takes d6 check. But that means black can't take back with the bishop. He has to take with the pawn, messing up his pawn structure and making it difficult from the castle-king side. And now white can break with f4, threatening f5, getting rid of the bishop pair and blocking in black's pawns. And if pawn takes, then black has all these isolated pawns in the middle. Stockfish suggests knight d5 is completely winning for white. Alright, so back to the game. That's not what happened. In the game, white played bishop e3 instead of bishop g5. So either he was unaware of this removal of the guard idea, or he didn't think it was that strong in this position. Okay, black now plays the weird computer move knight to b4. Of course, instead he should either play castles, which is the computer's #1 move, or maybe a6 to stop knight b5. Or he could even play h6 to stop bishop g5. You know, castles is probably the #1 move here. Knight b4 is just kind of a silly computer move. It does fight for the d5 square, but white can drive that knight away anytime he wants with a3. And the knight has nowhere to go really but back to where it came from. So knight b4 is kind of a Betho, kind of I'm out of my book move. What Betho does a lot of times when she's out of her book is she doesn't make moves that are like put her pieces on prise. She just makes moves that, you know, a human wouldn't make, that don't make a lot of sense, which is a good reason why, you know, I tell my students, if you want to get good against humans, you know, you want to play against humans. Humans give you psychological problems, which you have to learn to overcome. Humans don't play like this. Humans don't have the kind of time management that the computers do. They play, you know, much more like, you know, take a long time and then they take a short time, or they play too fast or too slow. The computers always, unless they're programmed otherwise, usually play almost right away. That's not how humans play. All right, so anyway, back to the game. So white decides to break with f4. And Stockfish 12 says queen d2 is a little bit better, but f4 is a good break move here. And now again, Stockfish 12 says, hey, Betho, how about castling here? And Betho plays the terrible move queen d7. Well, this is terrible for lots of reasons. One, it moves a piece twice in the opening unnecessarily. Two, it blocks the bishop. 3, it blocks the knight's retreat from f6. 4, it lines up the queen with the king on the same diagonal, so if this knight can't get back to c6, later on white could play bishop b5 with possibilities of pinning the queen to the king, and of course it leaves the king in the center. So it's a horrible move, and now Stockfish says if white plays perfectly, white's lead is up to 2.6 pawns. Let's show what perfect play would look like. a3, and now as we just said, knight c6 is forced or else you lose the queen. F takes e5. If knight takes e5, bishop b5, knight has to go back to c6. Knight d5, now he can't take because I'll take with the pawn and win a piece. Knight g4, hitting the bishop. Bishop f4. Hitting this pawn, and black's position's a mess. For instance, if he plays knight e5, simply bishop takes, pawn takes, queen h5, hitting this pawn. If black castles to try to save it, rook a d1, threatening knight f6 check, winning the queen. Black can counterattack with g6. Queen h6, and Stockfish says white's up by about 3.5 pawns here. He's completely dominating both sides of the board. All right, let's go back to the game. So that's what could happen. So white does play a3. He plays the first move correct. The second move, he plays f5. Well, f5 gives him space and locks in the bishop a little bit, but actually white's ahead in development and black's wasted a lot of time. So it makes more sense when that's true to open the position than it does to try for more space. This is always a difficult decision. Let's see how much time white took on that move. White needs to take a little time on that move. He sent me his time stamping. It's not part of the saved version here, but let's see here. He had 40-52 after the last move and 40-02, and this is a 45-45 game. So that means he took 50, 45, 95 seconds to play that move. Well, that's enough time. All right, so f5, and Stockfish says, well, that still should be winning, even if it's not the best move. And black plays the silly move rook g8. Well, the good news for black is it puts the rook on the same line with the king, and then he could blast open the line with g6 and g takes f5. The bad news is now he can't castle kingside, he can only castle queenside, and of course white has a whole bunch of pieces aimed toward the queen side, and the c file is already semi-open for black. So castling queenside is going to be a little more dangerous, and also he can't castle right away because the bishop's blocked by the queen. So black has all kinds of problems here. Stockfish suggests that Betho, his fellow computer, is now losing by almost 3 pawns. Okay, so white plays king h1. I guess he sees this idea of opening up the line and figures, why not get the king out of the way, and I don't have to worry about that. Again, not the best move, but not a terrible move to play that move. So black plays another computer kind of move, bishop d8, making it even further for castling, queenside, and taking a guard off of this pawn on d6. So white plays bishop g5. Now white says, oh, I'm starting to get the idea here. If I can take that knight and play knight d5 or something, black's position is close to ruins already. So black plays rook to b8. Okay, well, again, this is why you shouldn't play computers. So black can't castle anywhere now. Now you know where the king's going to be the rest of the game. And when you know where the king's going to be the rest of the game, you can kind of target it. Now white would say, oh, I don't want to play moves like f5 anymore. I want to blast open the center and see what I can do. All right, so Stockfish suggests that my student should play rook f3 here. He plays queen to d2, developing the queen. Reasonable move. Got to watch out for discovered attacks on the queen that attack the bishop. Okay, and h6 hitting the bishop. So should the bishop take the knight and give up the bishop here and let the knight go to d5? And the answer is yes, he should. This is a common positional idea when your opponent has weak squares like that. You remove the defenders of the squares. So if you've never seen this before, usually you don't give up the bishop for the knight if you're not messing up his pawns or something. You just don't give up the bishop pair that easily. But this is one of those positional exceptions where you can do it. And white does. He plays bishop takes, and now he can play, if he wants, knight to d5. Stockfish says it's more correct first to hit this pawn and make him try to guard it. If you play knight d5 right away, black can hit the queen. Queen moves. Black plays b6. Now white develops the rook, hits the pawn. But now the knight's in the way and black doesn't have to move a piece to guard the pawn. So this is okay. This is very good for white. But white actually plays the right move here. Very good for white. He plays rook a d1 and says to black, all right, you got to save the pawn. And black doesn't have any great ways to save it. Let's say he plays bishop e7. All right, white has all kinds of moves here. Stockfish says he wants to play the weirdly crazy looking move bishop h5 to hit this pawn on f7. Maybe with the idea later of playing queen to d5, we don't know. He gives then a6, queen e2, queen c7, rook d3, rook f8, and now knight d5, queen d8, rook f d1, bishop g5, knight e3, hitting that pawn. And if black goes back to guard it with bishop here, then knight c4 hits it again. Bye-bye pawn. Okay, so back to the game. That's not what happened. In the game, Betho says, well, I'll try to save it by putting my knight on d4. So Betho plays knight d4. Okay, so pause the video here and tell me what you would play here for white. Okay, well, what you can do here is, even though the bishop is going to be guarding this pawn in between, you can just take it, and when he takes back, you don't have to save the knight. You can just pin the queen to the king, and if he counterattacks by taking the knight and hitting your queen, you take the queen with check, and then he doesn't get a chance to win your queen. So that's a tactic. Now you could also play knight takes, pawn takes, knight to b5 and win this pawn, but obviously that's not nearly as good. Here white is up 3 pawns, but if he plays this move, he's up 7.5. So this is a kind of an example of, if you see a good move, you know, look for a better one. You would win the game much more easily after bishop b5 than you would after knight b5. But one of those two moves has got to be played. Of course, bishop b5 being the much better one. So white does play knight takes, and black says, okay, I'll just hit the queen. And now white says, yes, but you can't, if you hit the queen, you can't take the knight and stop bishop b5 at the same time. So white could play a move like queen to e1, and after e takes d4, he could play bishop b5. Stockfish says my student's move, queen d3, is just as good, even though you're not winning the queen, which is hard to believe, but of course, Stockfish is like, you know, 1,300 points higher rated than I am, so Stockfish says this move is just as good as the move I would have played. I would have played queen e1 and said, good, if you take my knight, I win your queen. I wouldn't want to play queen d3 because when he takes the knight, I can't pin the queen anymore because my bishop is blocked by my queen. But Stockfish says this works too. Okay, so pawn takes knight, queen takes, and now white's simply threatening bishop to b5 again. Well, how can black stop that? He doesn't have any really wonderful ways of doing it. Let's see what Stockfish says is the best move. Stockfish says black can play b5 so the rook can guard that square. And now, of course, taking the pawn is a big mistake because you give up 2 pieces for a rook and a pawn, and even though the Reinfeld numbers say that's 6 versus 6, that's actually a terrible thing to do. To show you how terrible it is, I mean, obviously white's winning even if he does that. But let's look at the evaluation. Right now the evaluation is 8.7 with the best move e5. Let's say you play bishop takes b5. And he plays rook takes, and you play knight takes, and he plays queen takes, and you play queen takes here. Well, clearly white's winning because black's king is so weak. But white's advantage has dropped in half. Instead of an 8-pawn advantage, he only has a 4-pawn advantage. So you've given up a lot when you do that. All right, so back to the game. Here we go. So white's best move is e5 here. Sorry, after queen d4, if b5. But black has to do something. Let's try a different move. Let's say black plays king to e7 so that bishop b5 doesn't pin him, and it also guards the pawn. Stockfish says white should play knight checks, king f8, and then simply queen takes a7, hitting the rook. And the rook has nowhere to go, and the queen can't guard the rook because of the knight, and it's kind of bye-bye game. All right, so in the game, Betho sees that everything is kind of hopeless. And that's another thing Betho does, is when she sees everything is hopeless, she plays moves that don't make you show her why it's hopeless. She just plays give-up moves, which, again, humans don't do. Humans try to put up a little resistance until you prove to them that you know the line that makes it hopeless. Betho just says, oh, I can't save my queen. All right, I'll just give you my queen. and plays bishop f6, counterattacking the queen. All right, and white should just save the queen here and threaten bishop b5. So white plays queen takes a7. And now we have the same situation as before, except the queen can guard the rook, but then the knight can remove the guard with knight d5, and there's no place to put the queen to continue to guard the rook. So this game is over now. White has two threats. Queen takes b8 and bishop b5, and black's position is just mush. So if you were a human here and you were black, you would resign. You would just say, okay, maybe better next game. But Betho doesn't resign. She plays the mate. So we'll play a few more moves and then we'll play out the rest of the game quickly because there's not a lot left, though. This game is over from the competitive standpoint. So black plays bishop takes c3 since she can't guard the rook. Now pawn b takes c3 threatening the rook is not good because you don't have knight d5 anymore and you don't have bishop b5. So you have to take the rook right away. And my student recognizes that and takes the rook. My student's playing at a pretty nice slow pace here. After queen takes b8, he has 1954 left on his clock on move 22, which is a little slow, but you know, you can play a little slow if the game's going to be completely over, because now he can speed up because he's killing black. He's got a double threat of pawn takes bishop and rook takes pawn, and bishop to e5 doesn't save things. Let's see what black played. He played bishop to f6. Let's say he plays bishop e5 and guards the pawn. What would you do here for white? White to play. Well, you always look for your checks, captures, and threats. So a lot of people would say, well, now I can't play bishop b5 because it's not guarded. If you do that, that's called a quiescence error because you think things are quiet after queen takes b5 and you can't do that. But actually, bishop b5 is the best move because when he does the forced queen takes b5, all you have to do is look further and say, oh, that not only removes the guard on queen take on the c8 bishop, so queen takes c8, but when he plays his only legal move, king e7, I also have queen takes g8, winning a rook. So basically what you're doing here is you're sacrificing a bishop to win a bishop and a rook. And if you don't see that, if you say, oh, I can't play bishop b5, that's a quiescence error. And these are the kind of things that good players don't miss in games because they don't make quiescence errors. They say, gee, if I play bishop b5, that forces queen takes b5. Does that do me any good? Is it worthwhile to sacrifice that bishop? And the answer is, of course. Weaker players go, oh, I can't play bishop b5. You know, if I do, then he takes off my bishop, so that's no good. But if this was a puzzle in a book, those same lower-rated players would get it right. Then they would look at the book and say, gee, I can't play this, I can't play that. Bishop b5 doesn't look good, but something has to work here. What if I do play bishop b5 and he takes me? Oh, now I see it. I can take the bishop and then take the rook. Oh, okay, that must be the answer. See, so when they're doing a puzzle, they get it right. But when they play a game, they say, oh, I missed that. I didn't see that I could do that. So that's one of the big differences between doing a puzzle and playing a game. And it's also one of the big differences between being a lower-rated player and a high-rated player. A high-rated player would say, if I play bishop b5, it forces him to take my bishop. Is there any reason I'd want to do that? And the answer is yes. Lower-rated players don't ask, is there any reason I want to do that? They just say, oh, that's no good. I see this kind of quiescence error all the time. So here, black didn't play bishop e5, black played bishop f6, but now white has a second move he could play. He could play bishop b5, but now he could also play like rook takes d6. So he has multiple ways, and of course rook takes d6 is easy to see. And that's, my student just plays rook to d5, threatening bishop b5, which he really doesn't have to do. Does it completely win the game? Of course. Black's got nothing to do here. He can't castle, he can't get out of this. White's threatening to double rooks, and he can take the pawn anytime he wants. He's threatening bishop to b5. I wouldn't have played rook d5, but it's a very good move. Black says, oh, I'll get a pawn. And white says, well, now I'll win the queen. And at this point, I think we can probably start to speed up because the rest of the game is kind of toast. King d8. Now he could just take the queen and then take the pawn. Stockfish says if he does that, it's mate in 7. Instead, he tried to get cute and pin the queen, which is mate in 10 instead of mate in 7. You don't need to be cute. You can just take the queen. Black gets out of the pin. White says thanks for the queen. Black takes back. White gets the rook. Black gets the bishop. White gets a skewer. Black saves one of the pieces. White takes. Black starts moving the king up the board. So what's interesting here is we can actually get to a position where black can checkmate white, believe it or not. You're always looking at these positions and saying, how could I possibly lose? Well, here you'd say, there's no way I could possibly lose. But watch what happens in the game. It's kind of funny. Queen checks, forces the king near the white king. G3, opening the diagonal for the bishop. It's check. King here. So now, if white is not paying attention here, he could actually get checkmated. He could play queen takes f7, king f2, queen takes g7, being greedy.
Checkmate.
And bishop takes e4, checkmate. Believe it or not. That's why I always tell people, when you're killing people, think defense first. If you did something like this with white, I have a video earlier where I call this allowing the flubly. So if you haven't seen my flubly video, I highly recommend that one. But this would be a flubly. And of course, how many times have I fallen into stuff like this? Well, not since I became a good player at all, because when I get to these kind of positions, I say to myself, is there any way I could possibly lose? And the answer is yes. You can lose with king f2 followed by bishop e4. It's actually a checkmate with the king and the bishop right in the middle of the board, so to speak. So this is not what happened in the game, of course. In the game, white checked the rook, and now the king should go to f2, threatening mate. But Betho goes king here. Well, if I was black, you can bet your bippy here that I would play king f2, and then I would hope that he would play queen takes f7, and I'd say thank you, check, here, checkmate. So Betho doesn't even try. Betho plays king e2. That's not a human move. A human would say, oh, look, I see a checkmate pattern. Maybe he'll fall for it. So black plays there. White plays there. Well, that keeps the king out of the checkmate square. It does let black take the pawn, but taking the pawn doesn't help if he doesn't guard the checkmate square. So black takes the pawn. White says, good, my king's on a dark square. Your king can never attack the dark square. Now I'm perfectly safe. The rest, as they say, is history. White has a million ways to win this. He decides to force the king back into the corner, pins the bishop, hits the pinned bishop. Black has to make a nothing move, and checkmate. Okay, so that was a game by one of my students sent to me exactly a year ago today. If you liked today's game, please hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can hit subscribe. I think this is my 144th video, so I've got 12 squared. So if you liked it, as I said, you can hit the like, hit the subscribe. We'll see you next time. And hopefully we're going to have our our Holly Heisman Memorial Chess Tournament. It's a fundraiser. If you haven't been to my website, we raise money for women in need. We've raised over $100,000. We give grants every year to different women's places through the Philadelphia Foundation. So we're going to hold the Holly Heisman Memorial Chess Tournament. Right now, the tentative date is Saturday, December 12th online here. We'll have more information. I'll be putting out the information on my website, on Twitter, on Facebook. And anybody in the world can play. I think we're going to probably limit it to the first 100 or so people that sign up. But it'll be a USCF rated tournament, US Chess Federation. And hopefully you'll be able to play in the tournament. So we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.